Hello, I'm honoured to welcome Josh to Identity 2021. Josh and I worked together at Coty's in-house agency, Beamly. Josh led media across the Americas and ad tech globally for us. He came to Beamly having worked for many years in publishers and ad tech in senior roles at Unruly and Seismic. He's got exceptional experience in the form of having sat on the publisher side, the technology side, the ad tech side, the agency side, and now the client side. 18 months ago, he left Beamly and joined Reckitt Benckiser, North America. And so he brings an exceptional pedigree to this event. So Josh, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys having me.
Could you start by giving us a little bit of an understanding of Reckitt Benckiser's total media approach, not the amount they're spending, but how the media mix is put together, and explicitly how digital contributes to the broader media approach?
Yeah, well, Reckitt is really almost three large companies in one. So we have health, which is primary brands like Mucinex and Megared. We have hygiene, that's brands like Lysol and Dettol and a few others. And then within my business unit, nutrition, we primarily focus on Enfamil, which is an infant formula brand. So for us within nutrition, it really starts at the consumer journey level. So we look at all the things that the consumer is doing from an online consumption pattern perspective and offline as well, to determine those moments of meeting, to then almost reverse engineer in a way how we're going to kind of plan and activate our go-to-market strategy. From that perspective and that lens, online is really everything for us. We get so much deterministic data and signals from those consumers when they're in those moments of meeting. There's in almost like a lean in moment where they're in front of their mobile device, and also a lean back moment. And things like audio these days are everything, whether it's streaming audio or podcasts. So there's all these opportunities for us to connect with our core consumer, understand the mindset, and then plan against that in that almost sufficiency reverse engineering capacity to determine where we need to kind of lean in during specific times or moments of the year.
So you've already jumped into some of the identification of people being deterministic. Can you give us a little bit more context of why it's important for you to recognize consumers in a digital experience funnel?
Yeah, I think if you're going to lean in on this principle of precision marketing, you have to understand the consumer journey in the funnel, especially when you're doing budgeting exercises, whether you have a $100 million budget or a $100,000 budget. You have to understand the awareness phase of when do I need to create category and brand specific awareness? When do I need to then lean in on that consideration? We did a ton of research recently around the fact that consideration could potentially be the most impactful portion of the funnel, where the consumer is doing a lot of digital touch points and research. To then that obviously critical acquisition, making sure your experiences are frictionless in a way that you're able to kind of pull in those consumers. And then of course, retention is everything. And that's where outside of marketing, there's additional supplemental divisions and focuses to make sure that flywheel kind of comes to full life.
So can I just get you to give us a quick perspective without obviously revealing anything too secretive and sensitive to Reckitt? There's a consideration phase, an acquisition phase, and a repeat purchase retention phase. In verticals that are more classical CPG, without an e-commerce owned branded website experience, normally is Reckitt managing to find a way to build that sort of first party conversion path experience, or is that through partners? How does that closure of the experience, either for the initial acquisition and the repeat, how is that captured?
Yeah, it's another really good question. So I think you have two choices these days, and they're both kind of it's not a luxury of not leaning in on one. I think we're at a place between ITP2 and CCPA or GDPR. No matter where you are in the globe, there are headwinds ahead of you from both a technology and a regulatory fashion. So I think option one or choice number one is you lean in heavily on your CRM data and you use customer data platforms to kind of power your first party activation. And then you use ad technologies outside of your MarTech stack, like a DMP or another third party tool to kind of supplement your CRM based system to kind of fuel that kind of first party targeting. Or if you don't have a rich and robust CRM program, or you don't have an e-commerce site, to your example, I think the choice is you need to take a look at third-party solutions that are out there at a certain point, which we are very, very close to seeing across the globe. Is you're not going to have those traditional marketing tools at your fingertips to target those consumers. And that is going to turn into, unfortunately, competitive disadvantage for you because your competitors, you have to assume, are taking advantage and using these regulatory and technology based updates to their advantage in a way that has those kind of signals be one-to-one and deterministic rather than third party and cookie based. So I honestly see it, Anthony, as an evolution that we need to take as an industry and something that I think a lot of people were looking forward towards outside of all these regulatory and technology-based updates.
How important is that? I understand the technique to look at the different data sets and match them, which is obviously one area of sophistication and challenge. But another area, of course, is establishing with the consumer a basis for that exchange. So is it a question of classic loyalty CRM type programs? Or is it about benefiting from a retail partner's customer level relationship? Where do you find that balance, or are there other ways that you're approaching that? Is it maybe through a payment partner, etc.?
Yeah, you have to look at both. I think it's really a great conversation to have with retailers these days in terms of that data sharing capacity, because if you don't have a rich CRM program, if you don't have a rich e-commerce platform that's D2C, or even if you do honestly have those things, you can still very much have some great conversations with the retailers in terms of privacy compliant PII type of relationships where they're mutually beneficial. We've had these conversations with some key retailers here within Reckitt and said, listen, our success is your success. If there's ways that we can tie in our data for both online and offline consumption and understand how we can optimize based on a sale rather than just a click or a viewability or a table stake digital metric, that's the solution that I think a lot of people have been looking forward towards. So we to your point, have had a lot of those retail-based conversations to supplement and use that to kind of fuel how we're looking at optimization for kind of a tactical media campaign.
So we've talked about first-party data predominantly being CRM and websites, brand website data. You've talked a fair amount about retailer partnerships, which we'd classify as second-party data, and then you've talked about third-party providers in the data space, whether or not that's a DMP complementing your CDP or other data resources. How do you consider the relative value and how important are they each to Reckitt as you build out the precision marketing strategy that you're building and evolving and seeking to create competitive advantage through?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I would recommend is determining what's the single source of truth. Because to your point, you have a CDP, you have a CRM system, you have your DMP, you have your ad server, you have other third-party data sources that you can, or second-party data sources that you can pull in. And oftentimes they can conflict one another. So at the end of the day, you have to say, all right, what is our single source of truth? And I think it's going back to that data path analysis and just understanding where is predominantly your data that you're getting, where is it most valuable, and then determining what other technologies can help augment that data to kind of allow you to see things from a more holistic standpoint. I think oftentimes there's this feeling that at least I get, where you can almost get inundated by how much data that's being collected and all the variety sources. And I think you need to take a step back and say, all right, what is my single source of truth? Where am I kind of trying to get to with the consumer? And then all these variety of technologies, how can we make sure they're calibrated in a way that supplement and augment that single source of truth, rather than conflict it and create kind of that chaos and confusion that we definitely want to avoid.
Now, obviously, ID5 is focusing in the cookie matching and universal ID space.
Yep.
How important is that service provision to what you're currently doing? Do you believe that is something that will factor fairly centrally in your planning as you move forward?
Within your consumer journey planning, you need to use reach and frequency to baseline this perspective of not inundating the consumer. I'm sure you as a consumer has experienced this, and we have all, quite frankly, experienced this, where you see the same piece of creative and the same piece of content no matter where you go, and it becomes an annoyance. And that's the last thing we want to do with our branded content. So I think you need to use reach and frequency to baseline that consumer journey. But then how reach and frequency is defined is really on that identity mapping that you're talking about. You have to recognize that there is multiple devices. I mean, most research shows average household has anywhere between 6 to 8 devices these days, and I think even that's understated. Sometimes you have even more. So you have to take the perspective of multi-device and multi-content consumption, and then using an identity graph and saying, hey, Josh Cierski, it just went from his work laptop to now his personal mobile device. How am I going to reach him in that moment of meeting where he might be in one specific consumer journey mode, during the day, but then at night or on the weekend, how am I going to reach him in a meaningful way? So that identity is everything. You have to be able to account for that multi-device consumption to baseline your reach and frequency that then baselines into consumer journey. So it's all these sequential decisions that you really need to factor.
So it sounds like, from your perspective, a combination of media practice in terms of the reach planning and frequency management, but also the consumer experience of not inundating an individual are all pretty important to you. In terms of micromanagement of messaging, niche profile management, is that something that you're also working on that links to being able to recognize an individual as they've been profiled? Is that already a part of what you're doing, or is that something that you're moving towards?
Yeah, I think that's where we're trying to move towards. And I think all those rich behavioral psychographic data points are something that we're going to try to get to in a way that, again, is that privacy, PII compliant and all the things. I think we've leaned historically from a third-party source. It's more of a matter of like, how can we get there within our own first-party sources or in those identity matching ways to get to that rich data to serve that consumer a specific message. Because, I think you could probably agree with this, and the fact that, like, again, it goes back to that creative perspective. I don't want to hit the consumer with the same piece of creative when they are in the awareness phase versus in a consideration phase versus an acquisition. I need to make sure my KVs, my key comms, and my CTAs are all unique to that consumer journey and unique to that consumption device.
So essentially recognizing someone that's come through with a consideration message initially, you want to ensure that your call to actions are sequentially linked so that you have the greater chance of getting them to act on that consideration. In light of that desire to manage the experience across sessions, how are you dealing with ITP, and what is that teaching you for the impending Chrome depreciation of cookies? What is it prompting you to put into place so far, or in terms of process or technology, or both?
So I think the place that I would start first and foremost is from the mindset of, this is not something that you're going to just enable within a platform or an ad tech tool and then be able to kind of forget it. I think ITP is something that is going to be a continual evolution. I think it's going to, require a lot of research and due diligence and keeping up to speed on all the things from a device technology perspective to account, because just the thing that's just always constant at the end of the day is the content consumption, and the devices are just getting smarter and more evolved over time. And who would have thought that, we would have been in place, 20 years ago, where pretty much almost all content consumption is on your mobile smartphone device. This kind of has taken over our lives. It goes back to this kind of idea of relying on the third-party cookie that I think has become all too comfortable with all of us, and making sure you're accounting for those cookieless environments. Because I think if you look at an audit of kind of your delivery, I think that'll be very telling. If you're in a place where you're looking at your ad server data or your DSP data, and that data shows that you're delivering primarily to one specific environment or one specific browser, that is all too that you're not technology capable in terms of delivering to the consumers that are using advanced browser settings or using advanced smartphone devices where they can accept that message from you.
So what's the answer to plug that gap?
First, analysis. You have to start with the analysis. You have to understand where the gaps are in terms of, is it device, is it browser, is it both? And then from there, you need to have some very open and frank conversations with your agency partners as well as your technology partners to then determine how you need to kind of adjust, whether it's your settings within the tools that you're using, whether it's the kind of structure of your strategy, to then determine how to resolve it. It could be a combination of both. You could be looking at your campaigns and saying, all right, from a tactical or holistic strategic level, I'm trying to do X, Y, and Z, and then not realize that because of those decisions, maybe your agency or your tech companies are calibrating campaigns in a way that is completely missing a specific consumer set. Frank conversations are really agency-based as well as technology-based. I think it's a dual conversation that's very collaborative. And oftentimes in those conversations, you need to see if the gaps are strategy-based, and the fact that your strategy might be forcing your agency and your tech partners to execute in a specific way that might create those gaps. It's a combination of strategy and technology. You have to take that into account when doing those identity map and consumer journey planning exercises. And I think too often not, it's just a one path conversation where you might be just talking to the technology company, or you might be just talking to the agency. You need to bring all partners into collectively as a marketer.
So one of the big issues we're all addressing is that there's a Google environment, a Facebook environment, an Amazon environment, and what's slightly emotively referred to as an open web environment. What is your approach to ensuring that you have integrity at a consumer perspective? Consumers don't see the walled gardens, but ensuring that also you're balancing your investment, because I'm sure you also believe that it's important to have a sustaining presence outside of the walled gardens. Could you give us your thoughts and maybe any of what you feel might be a Reckitt position versus your thoughts, if you're comfortable to share that?
Yeah, what I will share is that I think it's a challenge that we're all trying to facing. It's just, within the walled gardens of, Facebook and then obviously within Google, we get a very rich level of data and insight that we very much benefit from. But then when we leave those kind of walled gardens and we look at it from an open web perspective, and I'm a true believer that there is life outside of Google and Facebook. They obviously are critical and key partners for us, but at the same time, we want to make sure that when we're looking at kind of an open web space, we're leaning in on key areas or key gaps in kind of our moments of meeting and our consumer journey planning, and leaning in on data that is insightful, it's meaningful, and then also gets to the consumer in a way that they're experiencing something that we might be not reaching them or hitting them within kind of Google and Facebook.
So is the ability to manage identity in the open web, is that something that it is interesting and important, or interesting and not that important because it's quite complicated? Where, what does this ecosystem that sits outside of the walled gardens, what does it need to do to make sure you give it time?
There should be no fundamental difference between kind of a consumer that's within Facebook or within Google, or they're in kind of an open web environment. We try to apply those same principles in terms of precision targeting. There actually is a lot of moments of meaning for those consumers when they're in that kind of open web kind of consumption pattern. And so, yes, for us, we lean in even more heavily, I would say, on precision marketing and ID or identifier-based kind of targeting within open web than we do actually kind of within Facebook and Google. I think the one last thing I'll say with that is that's where it's even more important for you to kind of take a step back and make sure that you are set up in a way from a MarTech or an ad tech perspective to lean in on those kind of moments of meeting with those consumers in that open web environment.
Now, how do you ensure that the consumers understand that you're doing that? Presumably you have all of the necessary communications on your website, but is there something more we should be doing? Do you believe there should be a communication to consumers globally from trade body type, or supporting with the regulators to communicate to consumers that data is being used? How do you feel we get to a point where there's a greater acceptance of the benefits, the utility to move the whole personalization agenda to a positive, not a negative?
Yeah, I don't think we're collectively doing enough as an industry. I think almost everybody at this point, to your point, has their website where it's like, are you going to accept cookies? And I think almost all consumers, right or wrong, just continue to say okay, and then there's not that true value exchange that you're kind of hitting on. I do think we need to kind of bring that more to the forefront in our conversations with the consumers in a variety of different ways, because I do think at the core of it, if you are providing valuable content to the consumer and there is that true kind of value exchange, I think most consumers would be willing and able to kind of accept that type of an engagement with a brand and just the overall digital eco space. I don't think this is something that the industry should kind of, lean away from. I think it's something more that we need to do more communication with the consumer, because, you know, I've heard the term porous wall. I don't know if I agree with how that's being classified, but the porous wall has that basically mindset of, you know, getting that consumer to stop for a second, understand that, you know, they're about to come into a community that has valuable content and valuable messaging, and there is going to be this kind of one-to-one conversation, but then getting them to recognize that that's something that's beneficial to them and not just beneficial to the companies or the brands, I think is something that most consumers would be more than willing to accept.
So I think a last question, recognizing the audience that we have for this discussion, there will be a good number of media owners and intermediary technology and data providers. As a very substantial spender in the marketplace on both media and data, and as somebody who is responsible for protecting your brands and ensuring that consumers have a positive attitude to those brands, what would be your wish list? What would you ask publishers and intermediary technology and data providers to do in the next 12 months to make it easier for you to go further in this area than you even have managed to do so far?
Yeah, I think that the biggest key area for us is emerging technologies and emerging platforms. There are so many rich new areas, and you know, whether it's streaming TV, streaming audio or podcasts, and a variety of the different ways. What we're trying to do is take those same principles from a digital consumption pattern and make sure they're being applied to these kind of new emerging spaces, because that's where we're seeing a lot of insightful increased consumption. So the consumer that is kind of a millennial or a Gen Z, or even quite frankly, you know, if you're targeting an older audience, are really consuming content these days. So my ask to the industry, and again, this is a combination of marketers, this is agencies, this is ad tech and publications, is to collectively come together and recognize that, you know, digital is still the core of what we do every day, but then there's all these new ways and new emerging media platforms that we need to take the same due diligence at the start to make sure they're kind of foundationally sound from a policy and a technology and a deterministic tracking way that allows us to scale those areas. Because I think a lot of marketers right now are really excited about all these merging areas, but they're also very scared because there's not as much kind of regulation or tracking or variety of other things that kind of limit us from leaning more in on those areas.
So make sure innovation comes with integrity around measurement and safety criteria.
Absolutely.
And bring you more and more diversity of placement and audience opportunity because you're hungry for it, to summarize.
Absolutely.
One last question. I know I said that a minute ago. Do you see a future, despite cookie deprecation and ITP, for data-driven marketing using universal ID solutions?
You know, the deprecation of the third-party cookies shouldn't be something that scares you. I think it should be something that allows you to have some frank and honest conversations internally and externally with your partners from an agency and a publication standpoint, to make sure that you're using those identifiers as an opportunity to have even more impactful and moments of meeting conversations with the consumers. You might not have had as much from a third-party cookie standpoint as you originally thought. So the ability to kind of have that identifier and be able to capture those kind of multi-device conversations is something that we're going to be leaning in very heavily as we head into 2021 and beyond.
Excellent. Josh, thank you very much for giving us your thoughts and your time. And I will speak to you again soon.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Anthony.